Okay, class, so for today's lesson, we will be talking about Module 11, and that is about art history. Now, the learning outcomes for this subject, first is to examine the history of art from the prehistoric period to the contemporary society. And of course, enumerate the styles of art. So on this image, you can actually see the Judith and her maid servant with the head of Holofernes. This was actually painted by Artemisia Gentileschi, one of the greatest women of the Renaissance period. That is from 1623 to 1625. Now, introduction. Art may be considered as one of the earliest activities of man. Man could draw long before he could write. We have no record of how man spoke 20,000 years ago, but we do know how he used to drawing to communicate certain ideas. Next, let's talk about the Baroque art. Now, this style of architecture prevailed in Europe during the 17th and 18th century and was characterized by elaborate and grotesque forms and ornamentation. So, an example of the Baroque art is the Vatican City, wherein you can see the St. Peter's Basilica. Now, in painting, this is characterized by the movement, energy, and the restlessness. Now, the compositions of Baroque painting employs diagonal and zigzag lines that best express the vitality and movement quality of the Baroque art. Now, as an example of Baroque art, we have the Massacre of the Innocents painted by Peter Paul Rubens. Next, another technique, we have the Gothic art. Now, this style of architecture originated in the middle of the century. Now, it is characterized by the pointed arc and ribbed vault. An example of a Gothic art is the Westminster Abbey located in London. Now, the Gothic Cathedral, with its high pointed spiral striving upwards to the sky, illustrates the symbol and expression of faith. Now, all the important features of the structure serve to emphasize its verticality. Now, another technique, we have the modern art. Now, modern art is characterized by the contemporary styles of visual art, music, and literature. Now, it rejects traditionally accepted or sanctioned forms and emphasizes the individual experimentation and sensibility. Now, this is an example of a modern art created by George Seurat, that is from 1884 to 1886. The title of the painting is A Sunday on the La Grande Jatte. Now, this modern art also is the result of various social factors at the turn of the century that saw the mark of the advancement of science and technology. Now, this modern art painting was created by Edward Hopper in 1942 with the title The Nighthawks. Now, another technique is the expressionism. Now, it refers to the manner of painting and sculpturing in which natural forms and colors are distorted and exaggerated. This style of art. Now, this is actually developed in the 20th century, and it is characterized chiefly by heavy, often black lines and that define form and sharply contrasting, often vivid colors and subjective treatment of thematic materials. Now, this is actually Edward Munch, The Scream, painting and reproduced in Expressionism by Ashley Basie. Now, another technique is the surrealism. Now, it is a style of art and literature developed principally in the 20th century. Now, it stresses the subconscious or the non-rational significance of the imagery at automatism or the exploitation of change, effects, unexpected juxtaposition, and symbolic objects. Now, this an example of surrealism. It was created by Salvador Dali, and the title is The Persistence of Memory. Next, we have realism. Now, realism is an art style whose concern is centered on actual or real problems. Now, it delves on the treatment of forms, colors, space as they appear in actuality or ordinary visual experience. Now, this is a painting created by James Abbott McNeill Whistler. The title of the painting is The Portrait of the Artist's Mother. Now, realism is also associated with social consciousness and transformation occurring during the period. Now, the American society was then suffering from economic depression and moral decadence. Now, the economic depression of the United States actually happened right after World War I. So that is around 1919 to 1920. But in this picture, you can actually see it was actually created by Gustave Courbet, and the title is The Sleeping Spinner. That is dated in 1853. Now, in realistic paintings, form and content try to make a moving human message are works of artists who are highly sensitive people, feeling and living with their society, and finding art a vehicle for communicating significant human experience that will transform human values essential to a truly humane society. Now, another painting created by Gustave Courbet that is in 1849 to 1850 is a burial at Ornans. Now, another technique, we have the Impressionism. Now, it was actually developed in the last third of the 19th century. It is characterized by a short breaks, stroke of bright colors used to recreate the impression of light objects. Now, in literature, this is a practice that emphasizes immediate aspect of objects or action without exhaustive examination. Now, this is created by Edward Manet, The Luncheon on the Grass. That is dated in 1863. Next, one of the most notable technique in art is Cubism. Now, it is developed in the early 20th century, characterized chiefly by an emphasis on the formal structure of work of art and the reduction of natural forms of their geometrical equivalent. Now, this is actually created by Juan Gris in 1913, violin and playing cards on a table. Now, it is notable that this is the violin, this is the card, but where is actually the person playing the cards and the violin? And actually, class Cubism, it was one of the most notable painter for this technique is Pablo Picasso. Now, the Pablo or Picasso's painting focuses more on women as the subject. Next is abstract. Now, abstract is conceived apart from any concrete realities or specific objects. It pertains to the formal aspect of art, emphasizing lines, colors, and generalized geometric forms. Now, this kind of art is a logical extension of Cubism with its fragmentation of the object. Next, we also have the Renaissance art. Now, Renaissance art or Renaissance is the period of economic progress where cities were built. The term Renaissance or Renaissance came from the French language meaning rebirth, and in this period, another word was created for a man. Now, this example is actually the Vitruvian Man created by Leonardo da Vinci. Another one, we have this one, Venus. Okay, the birth of Venus. This was created by Sandro Botticelli. Now, there was a classical learning in the study of the ancient Greek and Roman texts. Now, the period seared enthusiasm for the philosophy and the artistic values of the Asians. So, if you can actually remember in Roman mythology, Venus is the goddess of beauty. Now, the ideals of classicism, balance, harmony, proportion, and intellectual order became the artistic standard of the time. That is during the Renaissance period. Now, this is actually created by Giorgio Vasari in 1569, and the title is The Six Tuscan Poets. Now, in painting and sculpture, an important characteristic of the period was the spirit of the scientific inquiry and investigation. Now, this new and vital approach to the materials world led to empiricism, which lay on the evidence of the senses. When we say senses, we're talking about our sense of touch, sense of seeing, sense of hearing, so on. Now, the artist strove for a more naturalistic portrayal of man and developed new techniques such as modeling shading for a three-dimensional effect. Now, this is the famous sculpture or piece created by Michelangelo Buonarroti, and this is called the La Pieta. Now, La Pieta show us the story of Virgin Mary carrying Jesus Christ right after his crucifixion. Now, in architecture, art and science of building associated with houses, churches, commercial buildings, or any other structure. Now, architecture is the art and science of designing and building structures or large group of structure in keeping with aesthetic and functional criteria. On this picture, this is Taj Mahal in Agra, India. This is included on the World's Heritage, or one of the most notable architectural that was created during the earliest civilizations. Egyptian architecture that was dated 3200 BC to 1st century AD. Now, the gigantic scale which distinguishes Egyptian architecture was made possible not only by the materials, but also by the methods of carrying, transporting, and raising enormous blocks of stones into position. Now, quarrying was done with copper tools and by the use of timber wedges, which, when swollen by water, it split the blocks away from the natural rock. So for this piece of block of stone, it will took around 2, 4, 6, 8, around 10 people for them to remove the block from the soil. Now, the outstanding feature of the religion of the Egyptian was their strong belief in a future state. Hence, the erection of such everlasting monuments as pyramid for the preservation of the dead. Now, let's talk about the Greek architecture that is from 350 to 30 BC. Now, Greek architecture during the Hellenic period, that is 650 to 323 BC. Now, all the temples were the chief building type. The earliest resembled the Aegean megadron in plan in having a timber lace, sun-dried brick walls, stucco covered on stone, doducts, timbered embraced portals or the origin of the door architrave, narrowing a little toward the top, timber ante or upright protecting the pre-ends of the naos wall where they embrace the pronaos and the fork, or a low pitch roof showing pediments or gables over the narrow ends. Now, this period provided much of the decorative inspiration of some Roman building types. Now, the Greek Hellenic architecture had mostly been of a religious character, but from the 4th century onwards, public buildings multiplied in type and number and passed into a permanent form. Now, another notable civilization is the Roman. Now, the Roman architecture was dated from 300 BC to 365 AD. Now, the Romans adopted the columnar and trabeted style of the Greeks and also developed the arc and the bowl from the beginnings made by the Etruscans. Now, this combined use of column, beam, and arc is the keynote of the Roman style in its earliest stages. Now, this combined use of column beam, we have the column here. There is a beam, okay, of the Roman architecture. Now, the Romans added as fourth and fifth orders of the architecture the Tuscan and composite order of the first three orders of the columns that was used and adapted from the Greeks. We have the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Now, Romanesque architecture. Now, the Romanesque style of the 10th to the 12th centuries was remarkable for the tentative use of a new constructive principle. Now, the deliberate articulation of structure in which each construction part played a design role in establishing equilibrium. Now, the general character of the Romanesque style is sober and dignified, while formal massing depends on the grouping of towers and the projection of transept and choir. Now, the character depends on the employment of vaulting based initially on Roman methods. Next is the Byzantine architecture that is during the Holy Roman Empire. That is from 5th century to the present day. Now, the character of the Byzantine architecture, which dates from the 5th century to the present day, determined by the novel development of the dome to cover polygonal and square plans for churches, domes, and even baptisteries. Now, the practice of using domical or a dome system of roof construction is in strong contrast to the early Christian timber tassels. Now, it may be broadly stated that the basilican type of plan belongs to early Christian architecture and the dome centralized type of plan to the Byzantine. Now, let's talk about the early Christian architecture that is from 313 to 800. Now, the early Christians continued the old Roman traditions, but prosperity was declining, and it was natural that the materials from Roman temples had become useless for their original purpose or purposes. You can actually notice that the dome style roof was actually removed on this type of architecture. Next, we have the Islamic architecture from 7th century to the present day. Now, the Islamic architecture is a product of a major historic event that rapid the conquest of diverse territories by a people with no architectural tradition, and the conquest synthesis of styles under one philosophy, but in many different circumstances. Now, the prime purpose is contemplation and prayer. Pero alam nyo, class, may mga notable dito sa mga sinaunang buildings na to. Bakit? Kasi, would you imagine, they were created 13th century, 14th century, napakahaba na, but still, nananatili pa rin pong nakatayo ang mga gusaling ito. Kahit na anumang natural disasters ang nangyari. So makikita nyo, na kung ikukumpara natin yung quality ng architectural structure noon at ngayon, masasabi natin na matibay or napakatibay ng mga sinaunang architectural buildings kasi nagawa nitong tumagal ng ganung katagal or ganun kahaba. Okay? And sometimes, sabi ko nga, bakit yung mga simbahan dito, kahit lumilindol, kahit nakatayo pa rin, bakit yung mga building, konting lindol lang, may tipak na, and siguro maganda rin na magkaroon ng pag-aaral or comparison between the quality of the materials na ginamit sa mga sinaunang gusali and somehow baka sakali na in the future ay i-adapt natin yung i-adapt natin yung old way na ginamit ng mga sinaunang tao dun sa makabagong pamamaraan na meron tayo for us to create, kumbaga, yung earthquake-proof na bahay na sabi nga nila, dapat nating tingnan din yun in the future kasi nga hindi pa tumatama yung tinatawag nating the big one or the one. And lalo na dun sa mga area na kabilang dun sa tinatawag nating Pacific Ring of Fire. Now, the early period, that is from 1494 to 1589. Now, the special character of this transitional period lies in the combination of the Gothic and the Renaissance features to form pictures ensemble, such as the flying buttresses or the pinnacles. Next, we have the classical period, that is from 1589 to 1715. Now, this period is notable for the dignity, sobriety, and masculine quality of its foremost buildings, resulting from the subordination of plan, composition, and detail and the unity of the whole, and the charity and simplicity in which the elements were used. Next, we have the modern or the international architecture. Now, the asymmetrical plan, evident only at first in domestic architecture, and the house growing organically but out of its internal requirements, seem to have originated with architects, later to be associated with the arts and crafts movement in England. We also have the theater. Now, the drama is an art form in which the performers act a story to the audience. Now, it is a combination of different arts, and in ancient Greece, the drama began as the worship of the god of fire, Dionysus. From this, classical Greek drama developed, written by poets and musicians like Aeschylus and Sophocles. All right, so that will be all for today.